"2005's House of Wax" is a remake of a Vincent Price classic movie. It stars Jared Padalecki, Chad Michael Murray, Elisha Cuthbert, and several other people. It tells the story of a group of friends going to a football game, and basically they have some car trouble and have to camp out in this field overnight. Through the night, this truck appears and scares them, so the next day they have to go to this town nearby to try to get help fixing the car. Throughout the process of all this, they discover that every single person in this town has been turned into wax figures. So from there, they discover that it is a pair of twin brothers who have actually done this. They kill everybody and they turn them into wax figures to try to continue their parents' legacy. What do I think about this movie? I like it a lot more than most people. It gets a lot of hate that I don't think is deserved, so just give it a watch. Today, we're talking about The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which came out in 1954. It was directed by Jack Arnold. It starred Richard Carlson, Julie Adams, and Richard Denning. This film follows a group of scientists who go to the Amazonian jungle to look for this prehistoric fossil that they found of a creature that is like a fish and a man combined. So, they try to capture the creature. The creature doesn't want to be captured. He attacks them. What more can I really say? There's a lot of underwater shots. There's a lot of the same song being played over and over. However, I do enjoy this movie quite a bit. It might not be my favorite of the Universal Monster movies, but I still think it is definitely worth a watch, and it was worthy of the sequels that it got. So, my overall thoughts, it's a much different feel than the rest of the Universal movies, but it's still very, very good. Next up is going to be 1408, released in 2007. This film stars Samuel L. Jackson and John Cusack. It tells the story of Mike Enslin, a writer who has gone through severe tragedies in his life. The loss of his daughter, divorcing his wife after the loss. Basically, he writes these books about haunted hotels and motels. He receives a postcard telling him to stay in the Dolphin Hotel in New York. Once arriving, Samuel L. Jackson's character tells him not to stay in this room because nobody has ever made it through the night. He pushes on and he stays in the room anyway. Throughout the night, it basically keeps resetting. He goes through an hour and he just keeps going back to the beginning. And things keep happening to make him see things from his past, his father, his daughter, his wife. Everything keeps just coming at him. But what did I think about this movie? I freaking love it. Okay, let's talk about 1959's A Bucket of Blood. This film was directed by Roger Corman. Yes, that Roger Corman. It stars Dick Miller as Walter Paisley, a artist who's kind of down on his luck, can't really get anything going for himself when he accidentally kills a cat in his wall, and he puts plaster over this cat, and everybody thinks that he's this great artist. Well, things start to catch up with him after a little while, and the police find out that he is actually killing things and people to create his art. Now, what do I think about this movie? For the time period, I think it is a wonderful example of how horror can be done without all the blood and showing everything. Now, Roger Corman will become known for his more graphic things later in his career, but this 1959 film was a good example of how horror was done right, even back then, and how it can still be done that way today. Alright, let's take a look at After Midnight, released in 2019. This film is written and directed by Jeremy Gardner, who also starred in the film alongside Abria Grant. So it tells the story of Hank, whose girlfriend has recently left him without any explanation. When we're dropped into the story, he's sitting at his front door with gun in hand. He's waiting on this creature that comes every night since she left. Now, throughout this entire film, we don't see the creature. So, everybody around Hank starts to say that he's losing his mind, to the point where even Hank starts to question his own sanity. And as I said, we never see the creature. This all culminates to the return of his girlfriend, who was away at her high school reunion. They have this big party, and when you least expect it, the creature finally emerges and shows itself. This film is on Shudder. Go check it out. I love it. The effects, the writing, the directing, everything about this film is magnificent. Okay, let's look at 2007's Vacancy. This film stars Luke Wilson and Kate Beckinsale as married couple David and Amy, who end up having car trouble and having to stay at this seedy motel in the middle of the night. Now, that's not a super uncommon occurrence. Most of us have stayed in a hotel overnight. Most of us have probably had car trouble at some point. But what makes this movie so scary is that during their stay in the hotel, they learn that the videotapes in the hotel are actually snuff films of previous couples who are being stalked and killed by these men who just appear out of nowhere. So, for me, why this film works so well is because it is unnerving as heck. I mean, staying in a hotel is pretty weird as it is, but then you have the added creepiness of these unknown assailants just appearing from seemingly nowhere. That makes for a terrifying experience, and this is one of my favorites. Today we're talking about The Thing, released in 1982. It stars Kurt Russell, Keith David, and Wilford Brimley. The film was directed by John Carpenter, and at the time of its release, it was not received well. However, over the years, it has gained classic status and has become known as one of the greatest horror movies of all time. And I share in this sentiment. So it's about a group of scientists in the Antarctic who discover that there is this thing who it can imitate other life forms. It replicates the cells and basically turns into those things. So they start fighting back, trying to figure out who is a thing and who's human. There's so much paranoia and tension and suspension because we as the fans don't even know who it is. At the end, we're left with an open-ended question of who is the thing. And as you know, this is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. We're talking about The Gallows today. This film was released in 2015, and it follows a group of high school students putting on a play called The Gallows. So this film is a found footage film, very traditional found footage film. However, it works better for me than some other ones do because I think the story works really well, for me personally. So it follows the group of students putting on this play. It's the first time in 20 years the school has done the play. 20 years ago there was a horrible accident and the student playing the character being hanged accidentally got hanged for real and died. So now, all these years later, they're putting on the play. These kids break into the school to try to tear the set apart so the play won't go on. This doesn't actually go to plan. They get locked in the school, the spirit starts attacking them, and there's a big twist at the end. So like I said before, this film works for me better than most found footage. Next up is going to be Open 24 Hours. This film was released in 2018 and is about this woman named Mary who found out that her boyfriend was this serial killer, and basically he forced her to watch him commit these crimes. And so what she did was she set him on fire and ended up going to prison for it. So now that they're both in prison, she finally gets out and she's trying to build her life again. She gets a job at a open all-night gas station when weird things start to happen. She begins to suspect that her ex-boyfriend is now coming after her once again, starting to kill everybody who comes in contact with her. But she doesn't know if this is real or if he is just in her head and she is just seeing things. I like this film because of the paranoia that it creates. Next, let's talk about The Killer Shrews. This film was released in 1959 and it stars James Best. If you don't know who James Best is, he's best known as playing Roscoe P. Coltrane on the classic show Dukes of Hazzard. So, in this film, he plays the captain of a boat who is taking supplies to this secluded island. When he gets there, he learns that there are these creatures on the island called shrews, and some of them have been genetically modified, and basically what happens is they all get trapped, and they have to fight their way off the island and basically deprive these creatures of food before they can eat them. So this film is a very old monster movie. Personally, I like it. I think that it does a lot of good things well, and the effects are really good. Next up is going to be 1989's Intruder. This film is directed by Scott Spiegel, and it features a couple well-known actors, including Renee Estevez, who is the sister of Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez, as well as Sam Raimi, the director of the first three Evil Dead movies, the Spider-Man trilogy, and most recently, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So, basically what happens is this film follows the crew of an overnight grocery store after they close down, and so they begin being stalked by this mysterious maniac, and they don't know who it could possibly be. And they've all just found out that the store is going to be closing down and they're losing their jobs. So, this film is a kind of run-of-the-mill slasher film that I really like up until the very last end twist. I hated it. Our next film is going to be The Phantom of the Opera, the 1943 version. This version stars Claude Rains as a composer for the Paris Opera. He has his own symphony that he's written, and he wants to take it to a very famous publisher. When he takes it to the publisher, he hears somebody playing it and then thinks that that person's trying to steal his music. So he basically loses his mind. He attacks them, and in the process, he gets acid thrown on his face, and he becomes horribly disfigured. So after this, he retreats into the sewers of Paris under the opera house. And basically it plays out like, the Phantom of the Opera story plays out. He is obsessed with this singer. He wants her to be the star of the show. And basically this is just the Universal Monster version of that movie. It's very good. Not my favorite of the Universal Monster movies, though. Love Claude Rains. Next up is 2003's Dead End. This film features Ray Wise and Lynn Shay as a couple on their way home from a family Christmas. Along with them, they have their son, their daughter, and their daughter's husband. Now, along this way, the husband decides to take a shortcut for the first time in 20 years, which turns out to be the biggest mistake of his life. They pick up a hitchhiker, which is always a horrible idea in horror movies. So along this road, they discover that this road never ends. It just keeps going and going and going and going. And the daughter's husband disappears. The son disappears. The wife loses her mind, and she ends up disappearing and dying as well. And then it's just down to the dad and daughter. And finally they come to the end and discover that they all died in a car crash. And there's just spirits. But this film is a terrifying experience the entire way. So today, let's talk about Halloween Ends. I know I already did a review on the channel, but I just wanted to take another second to talk a little more about it because I am super excited. So, again, I love what they've done with Laurie in this movie. I love what they did with Allison, their character arcs, their journeys that they go on. I thought it was wonderfully written, wonderfully done. The character of Corey Cunningham, I thought they did a very good job with as well. I didn't know what to expect, but they did a good job up until the third act, I'd say, because now I'm sitting with my thoughts a little more, and I do have some issues with the film. It's still good. I enjoyed it. I think that it's a fantastic thing that they just took a giant swing and did something completely different. I appreciate that. However, I do have some issues with it. I'm going to dive deeper into that for a more in-depth review. But my overall thoughts, they did a good job, and I thank them. Today we're talking about Color Out of Space. This 2019 film is based on an H.P. Lovecraft story and stars Nicolas Cage. And when you get Nicolas Cage in a movie, you know that there's going to be all the wonderful overacting and energy that only he can bring to a role. So we've got that going for us. Now this film follows his family as a meteorite basically strikes down in their farm. And from this meteorite starts coming this color that nobody has ever been able to see before. It's like something they can't even describe. And so throughout the course of this color, it starts infecting the world. It makes things change. It mutates things. It changes people. And basically it just takes over the entire world, or seemingly takes over the entire world. Now, this film is one of my favorite Nicolas Cage movies over recent years, and it's worth a watch. Let's talk about Stephen King's It. So, which version of this story are we talking about? The 1990 Tim Curry Pennywise? Or are we talking about the 2018 Bill Skarsgård Pennywise? Well, I'm going to talk about both of them in this little video. So, this story is not one of my favorite Stephen King stories, not even one of my favorite horror stories from Stephen King. However, given the two performances by the actors who played Pennywise, I think those performances carry these movies. I don't think that the kid actors are all that great. More so in the miniseries, which is understandable. But, you know, when you got Bill Skarsgård and Tim Curry being Pennywise, you're in for a fun time, and that's basically how I think of these movies. A fun time. Let's talk about 2007's remake of The Hitcher. This completely unnecessary film stars Sean Bean, who dies in every movie, and Sophia Bush from One Tree Hill. Now, basically this follows the same story beats as the original version of the film. The only difference is you're swapping out C. Thomas Howell's character for Sophia Bush. Everything else is pretty much identical. There's nothing special about this film. And the only reason I'm covering this one more and not the original is because I'm more familiar with this one. I saw this one before the original. And I'm not saying that I don't like this movie. I do kind of enjoy this version of the film. I just find it completely unnecessary and don't see that there's any reason for this film to exist at all. Today, let's talk about The Hills Have Eyes. This 1977 film was written and directed by Wes Craven, the same man who brought us Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, and so many other horror classics. So this film follows a family on their way to California whose car breaks down and they end up in this area that's actually shut off to the public. So in the midst of all this family of mutated cannibals comes out of the hills, starts killing everybody, and just ravaging this family. It is a dark movie. It is a savage movie. It's basically everything that a 1970s Wes Craven film should be. Now, I like this film. It's much better than the remake, and it's a horror classic. Let's talk about Psycho. It was released in 1960. It stars Anthony Perkins and Janet Leigh. The film was directed by Alfred Hitchcock in one of his most well-known films ever. So, Anthony Perkins plays Norman Bates, who runs this motel called the Bates Motel. Creative name. So, what happens in this film is Janet Leigh's character is on the run. She has stolen some money and she ends up at the motel. She talks to Norman. She gets his story. She learns that he is pretty much obsessed with his mother. He wants to do everything he can to please her. And this film gives us one of the most shocking twists of all time when the star of the film, Janet Leigh, who is actually Jamie Lee Curtis's mother, is killed halfway through the film. And it also gives us one of the most shocking endings of all time, and it created one of the best movie moments in the history of cinema. Let's talk about a film called The Car. This film was released in 1977. It stars James Brolin as the sheriff of this small desert town. So what happens in this film is nothing really happens in this town. It's a quiet place. Everybody knows everybody, that kind of town. So this car shows up out of nowhere. It is blacked out completely. The windows are so dark you can't see inside. And this car starts killing people. And it's hurting people that everybody knows. And so what happens is the sheriff of this town seemingly is the only person who can stop this car. Now, obviously everybody thinks that there's somebody driving this car doing this stuff, but in reality the car is possessed. And so throughout the course of the film, the sheriff tries to stop it. He tries to stop the killings of his friends and neighbors and family. And it's just a interesting take on horror and one I enjoy a lot. Next up is going to be House on Haunted Hill, released in 1959. This film is directed by William Castle and stars Vincent Price in what is to me personally, my favorite role that he ever played. Now, this film is about a man who offers a group of people $10,000 to stay overnight in this creepy house with him and his wife. Throughout the night, people disappear, they die, and we're not really sure what's going on. We think that there are ghosts in the house, when really it's a plot by his wife to try to kill him and take his money because she basically just hates him. Now, this film does have a bit of a twist ending. He actually knows all about his wife's plot, and he turns the tables on her and basically comes out on top. And it is just a fun movie. Let's talk about The Mist. This film was released in 2007. It stars Thomas Jane and was written and directed by Frank Darabont. It is based on a short story by Stephen King, and it follows a group of just your average, ordinary citizens who get trapped in a grocery store because of this supernatural mist that just covers the town and covers the world as they know it. So, throughout the film, they discover that sometimes the evil is not necessarily what's outside, but it can also be the loss of sanity that comes with being trapped there. Cliques form, people start threatening others, and the creatures outside are not the only danger to this group of people. So, throughout this film, you get all that, and the ending of this film is one of the most gut-wrenching, just heartbreaking things you'll ever see. Let's talk about Hell House LLC. This film was released in 2015. It was written and directed by Stephen Cognetti, and it is the first part of a trilogy of films that is just known as the Hell House trilogy. This first film is the best of the trilogy, although these three films, to me, they work together as one continuous flowing story, and it just works really well as a series of films. There's a little bit of a dip in quality in the second two, but the first one is just, it's phenomenal to me. It's a found footage film, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but this one is the best use of that medium. It is scary, it's creepy, there's these clown figurines in the basement, and we don't know what happens when this group of people putting on a haunted house is suddenly just attacked by these demonic forces. Let's talk about Sinister. The film released in 2012. It was directed by Scott Derrickson. He was also a co-writer on the film, and it stars Ethan Hawke as Ellison Oswalt, a sort of washed-up writer trying to reclaim some of his former glory. So in the process of trying to do this, he moves his family to this house where he knows that a murder has taken place. Now, he doesn't exactly tell his wife this. He hides it from her. And he ends up finding this box of Super 8 film in the attic. And these are depicting murders that have happened of different families with just gruesome deaths of these families. So throughout the film, he starts learning that he has to get out of this house. And the ending of this film will completely shock you, and it is definitely worth the watch. Next up is 1981's The Evil Dead. This film was written and directed by Sam Raimi, and it stars Bruce Campbell as Ashley J. Williams, the man with the chainsaw, the man with the boomstick. Now, we all know the legacy that this film has generated, but it all started with this little independent film shot in the backwoods of Tennessee. It follows a group of friends go to this little cabin to just get away, have a little vacation. In the process, they find the Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon, and they resurrect these beings called Deadites, and they just start killing people and transforming their friends into these creatures who just are bent on just destroying them. Now, throughout the process, we are introduced to Ash, and we all know what his character becomes, but this film was much more grounded and terrifying than the sequels. Today, let's talk about Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. This film was written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. It was released in 1982, and it stars Tom Atkins. Now, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill produced the film, and John Carpenter also did the music. This is actually where they wanted to take the series after the first two films in this franchise. And maybe we'll see more of it in the future. But it follows a doctor played by Tom Atkins, along with the daughter of a man who's disappeared. They discover that this man named Connell Cochran has been making these Halloween masks, and he has this plot to kill all of the children in the world on Halloween night. So their plan is to go to stop him, and it's actually a very good film. I know it doesn't have Michael in it, but it's a very fun film. And I actually would be interested to see more of this in Halloween's future. I like the idea of doing an anthology series. Today, let's talk about Scream. This film was released in 1996. It was directed by Wes Craven, written by Kevin Williamson, stars Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, and David Arquette. And this film basically just reinvented the whole horror genre, the slasher subgenre. It is a fantastic horror movie, and its legacy lives on to this day. We're still getting sequels. We're getting new characters, new life breathed into this franchise. But the original 1996 film is one of the best horror movies that you could ever watch. It is probably near perfection, and it follows Sidney Prescott after the death of her mother, when two killers begin to start killing other people in her hometown. Now, that idea of two killers was something that we hadn't really seen before in horror movies at the time, and it made for a very shocking twist at the end when viewers first saw the film. Next up is a film called Masked Mutilator. This film was released in 2019, and it was directed by Brick Bronski, who also stars in the film as a professional wrestler who accidentally kills his opponent in the ring. Now, after this tragic event, he ends up taking a job at a group home for youth offenders. Now, during his time there, he's just trying to help these young people get on the right track and make sure that they stay out of trouble and just live a good life. But during this time, a masked killer starts terrorizing all of them, and it turns into a giant game of survival. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about this movie because I appreciate when my two favorite things can intertwine and mix like this. Professional wrestling and horror movies are what this channel is all about, and a film like Masked Mutilator is definitely a good way to connect those two things. Let's talk about Black Christmas. This film was released in 1974. Now, Black Christmas is one of the earliest slasher films in history. It came out before Halloween, and a lot of the things that people give Halloween credit for, Black Christmas actually did first. So this film covers a group of sorority girls being stalked in their house by an unknown killer. We don't ever really find out who the killer is. We just know that he goes by the name Billy. So he kills all these girls. We see some POV shots, and there's some red herrings in there. We think that it could be this one girl's boyfriend. It's not him, but it's a good slasher film. Up next is going to be The Blair Witch Project. This film was released in 1999. Now, it follows a group of people going into the woods, and basically they're just searching for this urban legend, this witch. They don't actually believe that it exists, but they're still searching for it. They interview some townspeople, get their stories and their urban legends that they're telling them to just get as much information as they can. So they go into the woods and they start seeing these weird things, hearing these noises, and it eventually leads to them being chased to this house in the middle of the woods, and they can't get out of the woods, period. So this film was actually the start of internet marketing, and it basically convinced a lot of people that this was a true story, even though it is completely fictitious. And here we are, the final day of 31 Days, Horrified. We're talking about a film called They See You, which was released in 2022. It was directed by Tori Jones. Now, what's interesting about this film is I actually serve as an associate producer for this film. It's a film that was directed by a good friend of mine, And it follows these three brothers who steal a mysterious board from a local oddity shop. In doing this, they unleash a group of ghouls on their hometown. Now they have to team up with these two other survivors from past events to try to take down these people, these creatures, these ghouls. Now, I don't want to dive too deep into this film because I think you should go see it. I think it's important to support independent filmmaking, and this one's special to me just being a part of it and helping get this one made. So please go check it out. It's a great film.